Okay. It's 2 p.m. Saturday, the 24th of September, where I find myself empirically, and I would like to record a video, let us say 30 minutes, where I will talk empirically, normally, without overthinking too much about about white people. I imagine this as some sort of a self therapy. So here in this video I talk for myself, I guess, but from the perspective of a white person, so for whites and non-whites alike. But actually no one watches my video, so I talk for myself. First, a little bit of scientific rigor. White is an ordinary vocabulary used to talk about what the anthropologists call European Caucasoid. It can be quantified by genetic proportions, etc., etc. So it's a scientifically valid category, but we use in ordinary language the term white or whites. But it can be anthropologically, genetically categorized. Then there are the problems of the categories, continuity, discretion, quantitative proportion, measure, etc., etc. But yeah. The question of anthropology is the most important, next to or in connection with the development of the internet, of our times, of the early 21st century, in a chronological perspective. The demographics of Europeans. This is what structures and has structured the political, economic, social, moral, geopolitical, and civilizational and even religious life of the Western world, and by extension of the world at large, for the past 70 years in the chronological perspective. That's why, without thinking in favor or against whatever anthropology or race realism or the European legacy or the guilt of whites, whatever, just in order to make the world, the modern world, intelligible. Here I'm really serious. In order to make the world intelligible, one has to study and to understand the question of race first from an anthropological standpoint, whether one is white, non-white, white leftist, white right-winger, whatever. It's just yeah. Here a little bit of Hegelian rigor, although it's really the minimum. But the transition from nature to the realm of spirit, or Geist, is the transition from the natural determinations of man as a zoological being, as an animal, to the determinations of man as an anthropological being, namely from zoology to anthropology. And this is what the modern world in the West kind of refused to acknowledge, namely the question of anthropological realism has been left out completely of public debate. I mean, race is debated and talked about mostly in America and in Anglo-Saxon countries, but not from a scientific standpoint, from a moral, ethical, etc., etc. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to say. And the reason why I'm making this video is because I am partly sinking into insanity, but also trying to stabilize myself. And there is one determinacy, Bestimmtheit, that I am sure of, is that whatever white people, Europeans are not the Europeans of Europe, Europeans in the anthropological categorization, I mean white people, whatever they do, here I will use a quantitative Verhältnis, namely a proportion. It's significant, but that's why I say whatever they do, because it's so high in a quantitative proportion. I mean, there's such a great proportion of what most intellectuals, politicians, thinkers, inventors, public figures, artists, important, significant figures in all fields of endeavor, when they are European, most of the time, or almost always, they seek, consciously or unconsciously, universality, namely that which is valid for all, everywhere, at all time, independently of particular determinations. This is the simplified view of universality by Kant, namely that which is true at any time, anywhere, for anyone. That is what is universal. And of course, most whites, they do not think consciously. Some do. Those who have the philosophical training, usually leftists, they do this consciously, but most whites, they do not do this consciously. Whenever, for instance, when most scientific inventions have been the product of Europeans, but Europeans who invented whatever, the telephone or the radio or the internet or whatever, or the diverse medical drugs to cure whatever disease, they didn't think, I want to produce universality. They were trying to solve a specific problem, to answer a specific requirement, a specific demand, to supply. Here it's economics, it's partly economically determined. I mean, there are very few scientists who say, I will work for the universality, the good of mankind. Some do, and credit to them, but most scientists or inventors or entrepreneurs, they are driven by a selfish will, like most humans, but their selfishness, their will to become famous or to achieve, or here it's not necessarily negative, but their will to achieve, to become famous, or to solve a problem, or to outsmart their competitors, to gain shares on a market, in geopolitical struggles, to outcompete the opponent, in business, to outcompete the competitor, etc. Or simply to solve a basic problem, helping one's neighbors or students or professor or whatever. So consciously, most inventors, creators, scientists, discoverers, those who discovered, for an example, Columbus, he did not say, he didn't consciously think in the official storyline, I will travel the sea to discover the world. No, he was selfishly motivated by the will to make I mean, not only here, that would be really negative cynicism. It's partly true, but there are always the naysayers, that they call you, to say that whatever greatness whites have achieved, there are always some underlying secret motives like the secession war, the northern soldiers, actually they were not against racism, it was economically motivated. Of course it's partly true, but it's not completely true. It's sometimes it's not good, but it's lucid to be partly cynical, to remove the illusions, but to be completely cynical is not true either, but whatever. So Columbus, of course, he had maybe a great mindset, and he partly did, but also there was the selfish motivation just to make money, to discover new routes, to reach India, to trade and to develop commerce, etc. So there are the two aspects. There is the selfish motivation and also a greater sense of purpose. Here it's a partly a Hegelian view in the sense that psychological reductionism, to try to analyze all the achievements, the great achievements, not necessarily in a moral standpoint, but just in terms of influence of historical men, to interpret strictly through the lens of morality and psychology. It enables to understand the psychology of Robespierre or Cromwell or Jefferson. It enables to understand themselves and their times, so it cannot be left aside completely, but in a Hegelian view they were the expression of a more universal will. So there are the two aspects. Yeah. So yeah, whatever white people do most of the time, they unconsciously or consciously bring forth universality in science, politics, art. I simplify. And this tendency towards the universal that's what I'm sure of, is the particularity of white people, of Europeans. Namely, they are contradictory, because what characterizes them, there are the anthropological characteristics which can be found in textbooks about anthropology, and in this sense they have their anthropological characteristics like all other genetic groups or races or subspecies or whatever, and with the features, bone structure, hair, size, average size, etc., all the characteristics, intelligence, character also, so all the biological determinations. And here they are different than those of the others, which are in the official narrative the result of adaptation to environment. So on a strictly Darwinian standpoint, one could not say that one is superior to the other, because before the invention of medicine, white people, if they were put in the middle of an African forest or an Amazonian forest, they would die in a few hours or days or minutes, because they were not adapted. An Inuit in the desert of Australia, we would be unable to survive. And yeah, so here there can be no judgment of value, because it's just adaptation to environment in the official Darwinian perspective. But then of course there are characteristics which have become more valuable in modern societies, namely intelligence or delay of gratification or various aspects of beauty or size or whatever. And then of course there can be racism. This is how racism emerged, because certain group of people have a quantitative proportion of characteristics which are more adapted to their environment, but when the environment changes, not from a climatic point of view, but from the point of view of objective ergonomics, namely when the institution changes, features, characteristics which are distributed mathematically in a given group of population, the bell-shaped curve, they can become useless or useful when the environment changes radically. And in the modern world of technology, science, economics, IQ has become a very valued property in the global market. That's how things are. Intelligent people in terms of IQ, this is not the only aspect of intelligence, but it is the most reliable to measure the intelligence, and it is the most valued in the market all over the world in the modern economic system. This is simply how things are. Yeah. What was I saying? Yeah, so if we leave aside the anthropological determinations, from a philosophical standpoint, the characteristic of Europeans is that whatever they do, they bring forth universality. It's spontaneous. I mean, it's in a way it's true for all people, because through language one can only express universal thoughts, but it's done more consciously, more systematically, more significantly in Europeans, and in Europeans only. And I'm making this video because I've read an article. I work all day to try to improve my system, but working, in my view, includes trying to collect data to classify to order. And I read an article about ecology, and I realized that most ecologists, ecologist thinkers, they are Europeans. And throughout my life experience, I have noticed that in every field of endeavor, whites are, or almost every, whites are dominant, and there are opposition. Namely, the most important communist thinkers today, they are white. The most important libertarian thinkers, they are white as well. I mean, there are Jewish thinkers on both sides, mostly, and from all ethnicities, but most are white. The nationalists, the revival of the right, the traditional right, traditionalism, but also the modern form of leftism, the woke ideology. There are people of various ethnicities which participate in this, how should I call this? But most people who promote this ideology, they are white. The LGBTQ, it's for people of all colors, but most of the thinkers, or most of them are white. This is ecology, technology, economics, artistic expression in modern pop culture. There are great singers, great artists of all origins, all backgrounds, but most of the great artists, they are white. I discovered yesterday, I think an American girl whose name I forgot in England. She's kind of twisted, but whatever. The movie directors, most of them are white. Then in football or basketball, well, obviously for anthropological reasons it's more balanced, but in politics, geopolitics, it can be thought of as a compliment, in a sense that whites are active and they are vigorous, although from the perspective of the right, this is an age of complete decadence, and the decadence at all levels for the European world, not the Europeans of Europe only, but for whites, it's an age of complete decadence. But even in the midst of the most decadent era in the history of Europeans, they are still dominant in all fields, left and right, in terms of politics. The insane mass shooters, the terrorists, the drug dealers, the sinister abusers in various in the church institution, all the crime quantitatively, at least in Western countries, is mostly the product of non-Europeans, but the mass shootings, the networks of abusers, most are whites. The conflicts in the Middle East or in Ukraine, most soldiers are white. The bombs and the guns are manufactured, designed, produced mostly by white, financed by white taxpayers mostly. So, in the sense, there is the good aspect and the bad aspect, but the charity, universal care for the starving children in Africa or wherever, mostly financed by whites. These are mostly whites, Bill Gates, etc., who want to take care of all the world's problems, because there's the problem of guilt, but the white leftist humanitarians, they are not guilty on an individual level of having ever done anything wrong. They are, I mean, they have their vices and their flaws in their personal life, but they haven't done anything wrong. So they are spontaneously, they have this tendency towards universality. We have to help all people, all children, food, hygiene, good conditions of water, electricity, economic prosperity for everyone, education for everyone, living standards for everyone except for us, but for everyone else. We have to help the Asians by sending them our technology. We have to help the Africans by giving them food, shelter, education. We have to help protect the Amazonian forest. We have to protect the native tribes in Australia, in Groenland or Greenland or in Alaska or wherever. We have to solve the problems of black unemployment in the US. We have to take care of the economy. Here is the leftist white psyche, and I already said this, but this is why the joke that says that the white leftists, they are the real white supremacists, it's not only partly true, actually it's the case. Namely, white leftists, they have this software in their mind. They think we have to take care of all the world's problems. And they don't realize, here it's a little bit comical, that this tendency is what precisely causes the problems, not of the world, because the whites bring a lot of solutions. I mean, they bring problems as well. But this tendency towards universality, this is what causes so many problems within white societies. This is what the right-wingers, the right-wing whites, they find very annoying. I thought about, when starting this video, as making some sort of a scientific experiment. Let a white person with a very high IQ and a culture talk about the psychological problems of his race. Then there are my psychological problems on an individual level, but here it's the level of the particularity. And in this sense, whites, they are very special and they are unique, because I know out of experience that no other people thinks like this. The Jews, partly, who are partly European genetically, if we make genetic analysis, the Jews, the Ashkenazim Jews, they are partly European, sometimes even mostly European, from a strictly anthropological standpoint. There are the cultural, religious, moral aspect, and they are partly like whites in a sense. Partly they are different, but they are the closest in the sense that they too suffer from various yeah, but I know that apart from whites, and to a certain extent some Jews, no other people on this planet, I mean there are individual cases, but no other people as a collective thinks like whites. It's unique. Individually they might be transformed into some sort of But yeah. And I know here it's moderate level of lucidity when I say that white people, although they claim that they care about everyone, and in a way they do, because through their actions they really send money to wherever in Africa, they really send weapons to the Middle East or wherever. They really send technology to Asia. They really send ecological activists to South America to solve the problem of the Amazonian forest. So white people, in this sense, they might be said to be hypocrites. And here I understand the perspective both of right-wingers and non-whites, who in this perspective are on the same team. And they say white leftists are hypocrites because they say they care about us from the perspective of non-whites, who think in relation to white liberals, white leftists. So in a sense, yeah, white leftists are hypocrites, but in another sense they are not, because through their actions they really do, consciously or unconsciously, pretty much everything to try to solve all the world's problems, while being nonetheless selfish, because that's what I wanted to talk about. Most white leftists and white right-wingers, they claim diversity, welcoming whatever migrants, immigrants, tolerance, etc. But what they do here, it's well known in the right-wing spheres that some are logically consistent in a way that they really either they go live abroad or they intermarry with foreigners or immigrants. But most of them, the white leftists and white right-wingers, they live among whites in their gated communities or simply their neighborhood. And then white leftists, they live among whites, and then they complain about gentrification. They send their kids to the best schools, while promoting a socialist educational system that they say is for the benefit of everyone. But actually, here there's a distinction between the manipulators and the idiots. The good-hearted idiots, they want a good education for everyone, so they promote socialism, but socialism brings about the opposite effect, which ruins the education of everyone, but mostly, I mean not mostly, but of everyone. But because these white leftists, they care mostly about non-whites for the sake of universal morality, then they complain about, look, the poor economic conditions for blacks or for whatever minority, because the educational system is unfair, etc. And then there are the right-wingers who say, yes, the educational system is broken, but because of your socialist policies. And the right-wingers, they care about the education of their children, which are white when they have children, and so do the white leftists, but they claim to care about the non-white kids, which in a way they do. And the right-winger as well, because they want to implement a functioning educational system. So both care and do not care about others, but actually what they do is talk to each other, to one another, through the mediation of others. That's why I talk about the scientific experiment. An intelligent, non-white person with a culture, a high IQ, and an ability to detach himself from the heated debates around race, the white race, for such a person, should probably be a study, a fascinating topic of study, just for the ludicrous aspect. Like, of course, there are non-whites who study whites, which this method comes from white people, the idea that one can study another from a strictly scientific standpoint, collecting data, making analysis. This method, the scientific method, is typically European, but it has become widespread precisely because whatever Europeans do, it becomes universal. But there are non-whites who use this scientific method in anthropology, because this is simply the method of study. But the idea that we can study another group and this is mostly predominantly white. But what I wanted to say is that when others do this for whites, they do this usually in a kind of resentful way, which can be understood because of the actions and what whites have done to other races. In the negative sense, there's not just negativity, but in the negative sense, of course, colonization of America, Australia, Africa, slavery, Holocaust, discrimination, etc., etc. Yeah. But so usually the non-whites who make dispassionate studies of the question of race while studying whites, they are not, strictly speaking, completely scientific, because they usually want to denounce the crimes, the negative effects, ruining nature, pollution, ruining the harmony of the natives, bringing enslavement or whatever, which is partly true from the historical perspective, partly true because there are not just the negative aspects, there are also all the other aspects, prosperity, life expectancy, demographic increase, etc. But yeah, but there are very few, at least I haven't heard yet, but there probably are, but it's here I use quantitative determinations, proportions, significantly fewer number of scientific work produced to study the white race sociologically as a white explorer of the 19th century or even before, but it's in the 19th and 20th century that the scientific method became widespread, mostly in the social sciences. This is the typical mindset of a white person. Let us encounter another group of people and study them scientifically, and of course here there is the right-wing tendency, let us try to make the report as faithful as possible, and there's the left-wing white view which says let us idealize the other in a sense that everything they do is great and everything wrong. If we hadn't come, they wouldn't have known about capitalism, pollution, the patriarchy, whatever. Yeah. But yeah, this tendency, if a non-white person with a high IQ, I mean not just one, but non-whites with a high IQ, culture, and the ability to take some sort of detachment for strictly the love of science, if they could study white people, that would be a fascinating topic of investigation, because what I thought about, maybe I will put this as an illustration, Britney Spears, You Drive Me Crazy. The white race drives me crazy because white people they are simply insane, sometimes in a good sense, but yeah, about white people gathering together. The Libertarian Party in the US, but in most Western countries, where there are libertarian parties, is a means for white people to gather together without feeling guilty while doing politics, because when they are united politically under the flag of libertarianism, they cannot be accused of being nationalists and therefore negative in the psyche, in the collective psyche. So it's a way, an attempt. It's pretty smart that I see through the deception. No, but seriously, it's here I have laughed, but actually it's serious. I mean, libertarianism is a way in the modern day for whites to unite politically while asserting themselves and not feeling too much guilt. It's an attempt to solve the contradiction, because libertarianism, it is connected with what I said earlier, it's a universal ideology, namely potentially everyone could be a libertarian, and if it was so, the economy and the society would function very well. But the problem is that then there's the ideal and then there's the reality, namely that there are, to be a libertarian, it requires the intelligence, the will, the culture. Yeah, so it's kind of it is morally right libertarianism is morally right because the non-aggression principle and the universalization and autonomy, equality before the law. So in a sense, it's a Christian ideology in a good sense, but then there are the negative effects because there are negative consequences in terms of moral standards, because if everyone is allowed to do to behave however he wants, and if there are no coercive, not oppressive, but coercion in the good sense, then there has to be a collective standards set for the behaviors. A libertarian society can degenerate morally because when people become too wealthy, the morality morals loosen, it becomes a little bit dissolute, and then it turns into and then people want to solve the problems by referring to the state. Basically, this is a little bit the history of the US, but usually a truly libertarian society would be de facto virtuous because people would have no choice but to act virtuously for the simpler, from a simply economic viewpoint. In order to be honest, to attract customers, there has to be honesty, reliability, kind of transparency. But then there's the problem of totalitarianism, but transparent, etc. But and if there is no state to take care of the education, healthcare, the poor, the retirement, etc., people have to build strong families, reliable marriages, a collective morality of helping those in need without calling the state and extracting the money from the workers to redistribute. Then there's the corruption of the bureaucracy. So this is the history of the US in the 19th century and up until the 1950s, well, up until the New Deal, where there was a collective morality, ethics, without too much intervention from the state, and the people were virtuous collectively. But the problem is that to achieve such an ideal society, and whatever one says in a historical perspective, there are very few societies in the history of mankind who had the same level of relative success than the US between the end of the Secession War and the 1929 crisis. So for about 35, 60 years, let us say, the US, I simplify really to the utmost, but had reached a level of stability, political, social, economic stability, but also political stability and economic prosperity and achievements like very few societies, while preserving liberty, avoiding class struggles. There were racial problems, segregation of native Indians, and the discrimination of blacks even after the liberation of the slaves. So there were racial problems, but among whites, this was as good as it can get in terms of the relative balance between liberty, ethics and morality and virtue, prosperity, cohesion. It was kind of course, it's easy to imagine this while not having lived through, but it was kind of a golden age, because the social tension, the social conflicts between the various classes had been stabilized. There were, of course, the workers, they suffered that, but there was a kind of a consensus between white people who had found a relative stability, but it required religion, ethics, morality, very intelligent, hard-working people, etc., etc. But whites had found, that's at least the idea, had found social collective peace at the expense of other groups, but from a perspective of whites, without having to rely upon totalitarian measure of control, like it would happen fascist Italy or German nationalist Germany, National Socialist Germany. Yeah. So yeah, the Libertarian Party is just a gathering of white people. The ecological circles, these are mostly whites who gather together to think about the well-being and the welfare of non-whites for the next 200 years or 500 years or whatever. The Republican Party, it's a gathering of white people. Basically, it's the white people's party. But they do not dare say this, but because they are Hispanics and blacks, but they are mostly white. This is where whites gather to but they don't say so, but that's how it is. A sociological analysis of the Republican Party in the US would show that most voters are whites, and they do not dare talk about their identity. But that's the difference between ontology and epistemology, how things are and how people become aware of how things are. That's different. And when they do, reality changes in a way. Yeah, I can anticipate in a way. And then there are various kind of gatherings, whether music, concerts, depending on the kind of music, sports, depending on the type of sports. In video games, there are unconscious ways for white people to gather together without feeling guilty, while not being hostile to others, but simply being able to be together peacefully and to be not to reject others that would be negative nationalism, but to be together nonetheless. And they do not even think about this. That's the origin of white flight, or rich white parents taking their kids off schools which are mostly non-European or whatever. So there's this hypocrisy in a sense. White leftists are partly hypocritical, and the soft right-wing conservatives as well. They talk around we have to preserve our civilization, our culture, our value, but they forget to mention who is responsible historically for having brought forth these values, this culture, this civilization that the conservative claim to cherish. And when there's a group of people who says, we know who invented whatever the good aspects of conservatism or libertarianism or traditional standards of behavior or whatever, when they say, okay, this is this particular group, namely we white people, they are accused of being racist. But precisely this is the contradiction, that whatever whites do, they seek universality, and when they retreat within their particularity, namely when they say, okay, we are just an anthropological group of people, namely, I mean, that's not how they talk, but here I'm talking about the right wing, even sometimes the far right, when we say basically we are just a genetic group, they still produce universal knowledge by producing knowledge about race realism, IQ, sociobiology, etc., but they are considered evil by everyone else, non-whites and whites alike, by conservatives, patriots, and even traditionalists with a higher consciousness, or pagans with a higher consciousness. So they are, by mostly non-white, they are considered evil by everyone else. But yeah. Whatever whites do, they produce universality. This is the fundamental determination of Europeans. That's why they are kind of Hegelian, because this is the unity of the particular and the universal. The particularity, the characteristic, the fundamental property of whites is that they abolish themselves, not anthropologically, but as a group thinking of itself anthropologically, precisely, they abolish their particular identity by reaching to the universal. And they do this in all endeavors, science, politics, economics, morality, etc., etc. Because I just briefly talk, it's been okay, it's been 40 minutes, but yeah, 40 minutes. The leftist ecologists, they are good because ecology is good, because it's for everyone, it's universal, so it's good. But they are insane in a sense, not the intelligent ones, but here have to use psychological determination. There are the intelligent white leftists and the intelligent white right-wingers. They can be radical left, radical right, but they are intelligent, and in between there are the stupid right-wing whites, most notably the hateful racist. It's not very intelligent, just to hate others because they are non-white and to love your people just because they are white. It's the stupidity of racism, so it's kind of a sin and a mistake, etc. But it exists on the right, and on the left there are the stupid white leftists who they do the opposite. They hate their own people and they love non-whites for no apparent reason than they just want to fit into a system, a political system, sociological, whatever. So there are idiots on both sides, but there are very intelligent, serious white ecologists who really promote the well-being of everyone, but usually they want also the well-being of their own people. They do not talk about this, but unconsciously or sometimes even consciously they say, okay, we are really universalists. They do not use the vocabulary, but they say we really want ecology for everyone, which means for everyone, which means for also for white children and white kids. So they are not contradictory in the sense that they are really universal. They want to save the planet, but not so that the planet in 200 years might be inhabited only by Africans and Asians, but also by whites, by people of all colors. That's the real universality. That's why they are smart. But then there are the insane white ecologists who are partly smart theoretically, but they want to abolish the distinction between humans and non-humans, which at a certain level is on a cosmic level it's true because there is a continuity, etc. But they are kind of really regressive in a sense that they want to I've just read this article, but basically the whites who say now we have to advocate animal rights, anti-speciesism, because to classify living organisms according to species, it reminds us of racism. Racism is a sin. We are sinful and guilty because we are white, so we have to remove the guilt. So now we have to promote anti-speciesism. This is a typical leftist insanity, in a sense that non-whites, they have so many more. Here I will speak like a white leftist, but an intelligent one. Non-whites, at least in Western society, but everywhere, they have many other problems than just to care about whether we should hurt or not mosquitoes because of the continuity of whatever. So this is a typical white insanity. This is pantheism gone insane. I laugh, but and they want, here I find this really annoying from a white perspective. White people who want to abolish Eurocentrism in the name of universality, that they call cosmopolitan ideology or global thinking. But here I find this kind of annoying because they do not understand that what they call Eurocentrism would be the particular view in the logic UPS. Eurocentrism would be the particular aspect, but precisely the will to abolish one's own particularity in the realm of science or endeavor, whatever, is typically European. This is the particular, this is the self-contradiction of the particular. And only whites think that they have to interpret the world and think about the world and speak about the world and act in the world as if their particularity was not important. Only whites do this. This is why this is the particularity of whites, and the particularity of whites is a self-contradicting particularity. The Asians, they do not say we have to study the world and promote the welfare of everyone, so that let us imagine that the Mongoloid type, this is the anthropological classification for Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, or the Asians or the Middle Easterner or the Africans, they do not say we have to abandon the Asiocentric view or the Afrocentric view or the Australoidocentric view or whatever. Only whites think like this. This is an attempt to think and act in the world. So thought is the theoretical aspect, and in a sense it's good. In science, one has to abstract oneself from one's own particularity. It's very difficult, but a good, here I will say what I think, a good paper on race, on racial anthropology, race realism, if it's really good, the identity of the author should be unable to, one should be unable to identify the origin, if it's really faithful to how things are. Namely, a study about IQ, the anthropology of the person who wrote the paper, if it's really good, it should become irrelevant. But this idea is typically European. Only whites, only Europeans think like this, but it's nonetheless true. And here we talk about white leftist hypocrisy. When I read something, I used to read, I still do, but in the American newspapers, whites mostly, they promote Afro-linguistics or whatever. There's a specific type of vocabulary for Afro-Americans, which is true on a sociological level. And within any society, the language, the dialect, the modes of expression, the way people talk, the accent, the vocabulary, the type of words which are used are different depending on the sociological position. Namely, the way people talk in the highest spheres, it depends on the intelligence, of course. In order to climb high up the social ladder, one has to have a very high IQ. It's not always rigorously determined, but most of people in the high classes, high bourgeoisie or aristocracy, not in the formal way, but the economic aristocracy or the high bourgeoisie or the high middle class, they are very intelligent, and they talk differently. The way they express themselves, the wealth, diversity, complexity of the vocabulary is no match for people with lower intelligence. But so it exists within every society, which is hierarchically structured, and eventually all societies are, that the language spoken by the elites is different from that of the people, and then it can be subdivided into city dwellers, rural, etc., etc. It can be divided, but so it would be true. It is true in all African societies, all European societies, all Asian societies, but also in multi-ethnic societies. But then there are the ethnic element which enters into the equation, one might say, and those usually white leftists, they say basically it's good that blacks in America, Afro-Americans, have their own particular type of language with their own idiom. I don't know if it's an English word, but basically their own special dialect in a way. Yeah. But this idea, it's kind of hypocritical because those white leftists, they say, for Europeans, they want to abolish the particularity of Europeans, what they call remove ethnocentrism, not ethnocentrism, but also Eurocentrism. So these white leftists, they say, we Europeans have to remove our own ethnocentrism, but at the same time we have to promote the whatever Afrocentrism, Asian centrism, whatever, the ethnocentrism of the others in the realm of language. But the great, I mean, there's a difference between literature and science, but a great writer, in a way, he embodies or expresses the genius of his own people. In this sense, that's what I think, only an Englishman can truly appreciate Shakespeare. Shakespeare is universal, but one has to be English by blood and by culture to really appreciate Shakespeare, maybe. And it goes for every writer. In a sense, great literature is universal, but that's the problem of Greek and Greek literature. Namely, in order to truly appreciate Greek literature, one has to speak ancient Greek, which in the modern context is probably almost impossible. No matter how smart and no matter how educated in the study of the ancient language, it cannot, yeah, so here's just an opinion, but whatever. Like, yeah, for literature, strictly speaking, it's important, but then for science and for all other forms of artistic expression, the identity of the individual has to be indifferent. But in terms of the production, when the product is finished, like the Principia Mathematica of Newton, the identity of the author is kind of indifferent once the work is produced, but then the fact that it is Newton, an Anglo-Saxon, Christian, Protestant, he has produced the Principia Mathematica, it's not irrelevant. Once the work has been achieved, the identity has become irrelevant, and Newtonian science has been valid for many centuries for everyone and still is partly, then it has been improved. But it's the collective possession of every thinking human, in the sense, any person, Asian, African, Native American, Australian, whatever, can read Newton if he has the intellect and find in the work of Newton partly the truth about the universe. I mean, it's not the idea that here I will be a little bit arrogant, although I don't know, but the idea that the work of Newton is not good enough precisely because it's not very accurate, and Einstein had to correct, and even the equation of Einstein, they do not predict everything, there are still contradictions. But this level of requirement and demand, only whites do this, namely only white people criticize Newton for not being good enough in a way. And here I will be a little bit arrogant. Those white people who say whenever they hear about mythology, about whatever primitive tribe, they say, oh, there's a tradition in this. Yeah, I'll speak like Zizek. I will talk about Zizek later because, yeah, it's interesting. This tradition, they predicted that there would be changes. Oh, that's fascinating. They predicted change. But white people, they send satellites around whatever planet. They send robots on Mars, on the moon, with extreme accuracy and precision. And white people, they no longer care. Like, well, that's just what our societies do nothing new, we're not surprised at this point. So to send a satellite or how do you call it, a spaceship or a spacecraft with rigorous precision over hundreds of thousands of kilometers or miles, it requires a tremendous collective intellectual achievement. But people, or just to invent a new drug, a new medical drug to solve whatever problem, whatever disease, whatever new forms of cancer, or it requires a tremendous individual and collective intelligence on the level of a societies. But no one cares any longer. But so there's this idea that yeah. So yeah, these white leftists, they say that ethnocentrism for Europeans, that's not how they think, but the moment of the particular is wrong for Europeans, but it's good for non-Europeans. So they celebrate whenever Afro-Americans, here I will say what I think, when they cannot, for whatever reason, the educational system, the demographic, the dysgenic at works within the demographics, because it works for every ethnic group. There are dysgenic processes, but it impacts mostly the poorest because of the welfare state, which encourages the least intelligent to reproduce most. And since whites are blacks are underprivileged for reasons in the US, they are the first victims from the negative effects upon the demographic health, not in terms of number, in terms of quality. Quality is quantity, but here not in terms of number, of the negative effects of the welfare state. So yeah, the kind of, to say that Afro-Americans, it's good when they regress back to a kind of some sort of a limited language with their own, I mean, it can be, there can be the good aspect, namely the appeal of having a special type of language, but actually the standards should be everyone should speak English properly on the level of universality, namely two native English speaking persons, not native English persons, English speaking person. The standards should be the same for everyone, knowing that then there are various degrees in the standards, high and low in terms of sociology, but there shouldn't be lower standards when the sociological determinism is taken into account for people depending on their race. One should not expect black people to talk like black, because in my perspective, this is my opinion, but this is derogatory. Like to say, oh, you are allowed to talk like a black person, although you are supposed to be a native speaking person of this country, whatever the historical process, whatever historical process has brought you here. But to say, from a white perspective, say blacks, they are allowed to talk funny in a way, pidgin English, because they are black, I would find this insulting. Then I am kind of lucid, like if there is a sociological gradation. Here, if an English-speaking person look at this, they can make fun of me because I do not fully master the language that I'm trying to. But in the gradation, yeah. Of course, if the quantitative proportion of people of other ethnicities, namely here black or Asian, are higher or lower sociologically, it's a logical consequence that their language, because it is sociologically determined, which sociology is determined itself by IQ, and it also determines education and climbing up or down the social ladder. So to expect a non-white to speak less fluently, with less wealth of vocabulary, because he's poor sociologically, okay, because that's simply how things are, because whites as well, in the lower spheres, the lower strata of a white societies, white people, they also have their particular type of language, but it is determined sociologically, namely education and income. And it is, I'm not stupid, and this education and income are partly determined by IQ. So yeah, but to say we have no expectations for non-whites, and even we celebrate when they regress to a lower forms of expression, this is white supremacy from the leftist perspective, and here it's kind of yeah. it's kind of annoying from the perspective of a white person, because whenever because the standards are not the same within the white psyche. Namely, whites have different standards for others than for themselves. They tolerate, and in a sense, that's why white people, no matter whether they are left wingers or right wingers, they are all white supremacists. That's why non-whites, they are right, and white leftists as well, but there are different types of white supremacy, and the leftist type can be sometimes annoying. The right-wing type as well. I will talk briefly about Zizek, because I suffer from so many problems at all levels. Whoever or whatever I am, I suffer from problems. But for me, this is part of my intellectual path. I was spontaneously attracted when I was in my early 20s by Zizek. In a way, I still am, because Zizek for me represents the an insane white leftist in a way, but in a good sense of insanity. Namely, Zizek for me is the archetypal white leftist as how he should be. Namely, we care about non-whites, but also about whites, about their economic well-being, etc. But we are not insane in the sense that we can talk with right-wingers, we can be honest. Political correctness is complete bullshit. So Zizek, he's an honest, intelligent white leftist, and in my view, every white leftist should be like Zizek. I mean, no, because otherwise white society would be madhouses or asylum, but they already are. But no, seriously, let us remove the personality of Zizek. Let us just talk about the archetype. A white leftist ought to be an intelligent person who sincerely wishes the well-being of the underprivileged, of his own people, and the underprivileged everywhere, because he's universalist, and here universalism is good, but he shouldn't wish to promote the well-being of others at the expense of the well-being not of himself, because it's very profitable to be a white leftist in modern white societies, but at the expense of his own people. Whites should be allowed to promote the good of their own people, while also promoting the good of everyone else, because this is what white people do. And yeah. There is an aspect of insanity, really negative insanity, within the leftist white psyche, and this insanity, the will to self-replace, to self-mutilate, to self-flagellate. I mean, there are reasons to be guilty. I am intelligent enough to know that, but really there are excessive reasons. The average white leftist who haven't done anything wrong in their life, I mean, whatever they have done, but they have not enslaved anyone, they haven't colonized anyone, but by thinking of themselves as being responsible for all non-whites, they tolerate forms of behavior among non-whites which should not be tolerated. Namely, there are crimes which should not be tolerated, and the idea that, oh, we should excuse them because they are non-white, no, here really it's intellectual degeneracy from the perspective of whites, which allow some form of behavior which should not be tolerated within any healthy society. From whites or non-whites, some behaviors simply should not be tolerated. So yeah, there are an insane part of the white leftist psyche, and this insanity, then we can trace back the causes in a historical process, guilt for the past centuries. But this leftist insanity brings forth the reaction of the right, and here I speak really, I would say intelligently, in a dispassionate way. It brings forth a reaction of good people who turns toward the right, and they become really negative, and they become partly insane on the right as well, by becoming really racist and kind of nihilistic and even self-hating. So there's the leftist white self-hatred, and whose counterbalance is the right-wing white self-hatred, and they mutually reciprocally determine one another. And in the middle, or it's not really the middle, but there are the intelligent whites who try to solve the problems of the insanity of the white psyche, which is made manifest in the various groups, the insane blue lady. I mean, I don't blame them, but it's just an illustration. But also there are the insane, on the right there are the insane far-right mass shooters or terrorists or nihilistic self-hating people. So there are the insane aspects on both sides, which shapes and determine the life of white countries. And in the middle there are the intelligent whites. The example would be Zizek and Peterson, or Charles Murray, Ron Paul, or even Jared Taylor. Intelligent. I mean, I know about Jared Taylor. He's kind of dangerous because he's so well spoken, eloquent, etc., and his ideas are kind of radical, but he's nonetheless respectable. So the respectable, intelligent white people try to maintain the balance between the insane tendencies of the white left and the white right, while also taking into account the problems of all the others within their society and everywhere else in the world. And my problem, I know that I have suffered from both aspects of the insanity. First, the right-wing tendency as a reaction against the left-wing insanity, and then I tried to counterbalance, and I fell into the opposite trap. Namely, I became partly, over the past few months, partly an insane white leftist. And now I'm trying to restore the balance, and this is why I keep promoting Ron Paul, Charles Murray, and the libertarians, because when I'm really losing it completely, where is common sense? Okay, American common sense. Yeah. This is kind of my mental stability. But the white psyche has kind of degenerated so irrationally on the left that to say Ron Paul, Charles Murray, Jeff Deist and the Mises Institute, it's just common sense, it has become far-right extremism. So there's a problem. Here I've been talking for more than an hour. The way I understand, maybe my problem in a political, and the problem of the West, and the problem of whites, and everyone's problem is the fact that the particularity of white people, and every people has a particularity, is that it always tends towards the universal. And if white people could just be aware of that, like if ecologists would say, yeah, that's true, and libertarian, yeah, that's true, and communist, white communist, yeah, that's true, and even the conservative, they are just the white racist, the right-wing nationalist who try to escape from the conditioning, namely the idea that whatever whites do, they do universality, and those who are kind of sick of carrying this burden it's a privilege, but it's also a burden, they retreat into their most particular aspect, which is either their own country or their own race, and then everyone hates them. But yeah. What I want to say, I will conclude that I will promote my books that I do. I will just seek the books. I try to be honest and to do good, because I'm an insane white person. I mean, just an ordinary white person. What is ordinary for whites is insane also. I'm just ordinarily insane, maybe. But what I wanted to say when I began the video was, first I will show my books, that I will know whatever I think. I will share these books. Either people use them for good. I mean, they can. I don't think that they can use them for bad. Here it's just the educational system turns people into idiots. The same. I could explain the theological, dialectical reasons why people have to be turned into idiots, because in the grand scheme of things. But no, I will here just use a common sense that, given the current circumstances, the educational system is just broken. Bullshit jobs. You can check this on the internet. Utopia of rules. Yeah. Bureaucracy by Mises. So yeah, right-wing Jewish thinkers, left-wing Jewish thinkers, common sense American libertarians, how to abolish the welfare state. I could make a lecture on the negative impact of the welfare state in terms of the genetic deterioration, the moral decadence, the dependence, the economic problems, the debt problems, etc. But I won't do that in this video. Real education, I could speak about the depth of the fact that the educational, the young in America now, they are indebted for 30 years to pay for an education which consists in teaching them nonsense. But then I could make a lecture of explaining why this is I have reached a point where I will just speak normally. No, not always, I still try to introduce my categories. But I started this video, I just wanted to say, I just would like white people to live in peace with one another, and I know that in order to achieve this, whites somehow, they have a duty, a moral duty, they feel morally compelled to solve all the world's problems. And I can anticipate the non-whites, what they think probably is that, but you try to solve the problems that you have caused to us. Like you are trying to bring solutions to problems that you have created when speaking to the white race. And the white, the stupid, I mean not stupid, not stupid is not the problem, but the kind of good-hearted, that's my classification. It's quantitative. There are the manipulators at the top, the good-hearted in the middle, and the stupid at the bottom. The stupid and the good-hearted, they are good-hearted, but the good-hearted, it's kind of really good and kind of beautiful. The stupid, it's really stupidity. And the manipulators, they are kind of scheming. That's my view of the white leftist psyche. And it also works for the right, but whatever. Yeah, so what was I saying? Yeah, that whites, somehow, they can only feel good about themselves and at peace if they solve all the world's problems. And they keep arguing against one another. In realm of politics, it's right versus left, to find the best way of solving others' problems. Because that's the particular and the universal. White people, they are programmed in such a way that they can only solve their problems by solving everyone else's problems. And here I will end on a note of honesty. In a way, I think it's the truth, because I speak as a white person. I care about others, non-whites, to the extent that helping them might enable me to think, to feel good about myself. That's why I am partly an insane leftist. I want to help non-whites when I do, because I want to feel good about myself, because I want kind of increase the prestige, the moral prestige of my people. That's one way of thinking. But I tend to suffer from lack of balance. And here I will talk about my personal experience as an empirical individual. On an intellectual level, I have tried for the past few months to promote really universalism. And here I am not deceiving, because this is what I've tried to do, to really think like a coherent, I would say a coherent leftist, no, a coherent white person, namely to think about universality and really to try to solve the problems on a theoretical level. But then in my empirical life, on an empirical level, if I could choose, of course there are exceptions, but if I could choose between being with whites or with non-whites, I would rather be with whites, because I think on an empirical level that they are my people, whatever their origin. Southern Europe, the Italians or the Spaniards, or Eastern Europe, or Northern Europe, of course, but on an empirical level, when I am with here I speak I speak the truth to God. An Eastern European is different in terms of culture and anthropology, but I identify, more easily, and then there are the continuity, the various categories, etc. Of course. But an Eastern European, from my empirical perspective, he's part of what I call my people on an empirical level, less than those that identify maybe wrongly, I don't know, but Western whites, basically. Because then there's the anthropological aspect, the cultural aspect, etc. Culturally, I identify with the Germans, the French, and the Anglo-Saxons. All my references, plus the ancient Greeks and the Romans, but mostly Northwestern Europe, these are my references, culturally. That's why I'm talking about America, because for me America is an English country. not English, but I understand myself. But so yeah, but when I encounter Eastern Europeans, I feel that they belong to my people on an empirical level, the way that non-whites don't, although I might share cultural references with non-whites. I feel closer on an empirical level to whites with a different culture, so that's my contradiction. And this is the contradiction between anthropology and law, between subjektiver Geist and objektiver Geist. And I know, because I am kind of smart, not always, but that objektiver Geist has more truth, and in a sense I'm a universalist, that morality and law and Sittlichkeit, they can be universalized, so they are more true than the anthropological aspect. But, so I know this because I'm a Hegelian, but I am smart enough to understand this, but I'm also smart enough to understand that the ideal, not the idea, the ideal of equality between thinking agents, precisely that morality should be the same for all, the law should be the same for all. Of course, it's noble and it's good and it's the truth in a good sense of the universality, but in order to reach this ideal, first, only white people set for themselves this standard of universality, which are Christian. Christianity means universality. Every man is a child of God and has a soul that's the good universality. In this sense, I am a Christian, of course, but this standard here, the suffering of the individual, quantitatively, that's what I thought during my development. When I thought about libertarianism, I said to myself, it was 2018, June probably, that basically in a libertarian society populated by 98% of blacks, they would allow you to be a white nationalist. You probably wouldn't have a lot of political success, but at least you could advocate white nationalism. Or you could make meetings with white people to talk about white nationalism. The black, if the society is libertarian, they would be smart enough to allow you to do this. But I knew, this sounds like kind of a joke, but it's kind of true. But also, I am smart enough to realize that quantitatively, those who promote these standards, these ideals in terms of universality, these are mostly white people. Overwhelmingly. And the life of whites as well as the life of everyone has been shaped predominantly over the past 5 centuries in a chronological perspective, but even more over the course of the past 2 centuries, and even more over the course of the past 60, 70 or 50 years. The life of the whole world has been shaped by this typically European white characteristic, namely the will to universalize. And here I will conclude for myself or for God this particular versus universal. This is what I suffer from on a political but also psychological level. This is the contradiction. I mean, I try to do good because I know that the universal is the good, but I have white guilt and shame and remorse in me, but also kind of pride and I will say what I think on what I think on an empirical level. I just would like white people to be able to appreciate one another and themselves and others eventually, but to appreciate themselves without being insane, basically. I will end the video, and now I will do whatever insane white person does. I will work on my system, my totalitarian system, my categories, my data, my... That's what I will do, because... I am tormented. God knows it's the truth. I am tormented between a sense of duty and which I try to do my moral duty because I know myself to be evil, so I try to redeem myself. It's a sense of a moral obligation. Like I have to universalize, I have to love everyone, but this is a formal, abstract duty, and when I'm honest, I just love white people more, but they make me suffer. I will end with a note of comedy while I'm in a mood to laugh. Really, the white race, from the perspective of a non-white who is intelligent, educated, culturally, etc. It's a topic of inquiry that should be kind of fascinating. I will put the picture of Britney Spears, you drive me crazy, I'm so into you, whatever. Now I will work. I will take a short pause and then I will work. Look what you make me do. I just make a comment, but I understand white leftists so well, because there is this insanity in a sense of moral responsibility, which degenerates into sometimes into real insanity. But whatever. I will speak as a white leftist here. It feels so good to to have a sense of to think that we do good. Then there is the consequences, which are not always good, but I need to feel good about myself. And leftists and white people, they are programmed, I mean, to a certain extent every human, but within whites it's a different measure maybe, the need to feel good about oneself. And whites, they find so many weird ways and insane from a perspective of trying just to feel good about themselves. I will end the video now, and I will keep working